Alrighty, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. And what an episode you've joined us for. As you may have noticed, this is slightly different than some of our other episodes because we don't have a guest. This time it's going to be a fun team episode and we love to have a bit of fun with these ones. But if you've looked at the title, you will have noticed this is a very exciting episode because this is, of course, our 250th episode. So this is episode 250, which is very exciting. So before we even see how everyone's week has been, well, actually, no, let's start with weeks, then we'll get into the 250 of it all. So, Al, how are you going this week? How's things?
I've been having a bit of a quiet week, Jess. For anybody who can see the video, I've been to the skin doctor and had lots of little red patches burnt off on my face. But the good news is my wife says I look a bit like Huckleberry Finn, which she thinks is cute.
Well, great. You've jumped on the pod as well after that, Al. And you know what? I think that is a compliment. I have to say, it sounds good.
Thanks, Jess.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you on for episode 250, Al. Danette, now, I think if people are watching the video, they'll see that you're by yourself in the mobile recording studio, but you're not by yourself because you are joined by our CEO, Graham. So, Director of Learning, Danette, CEO, Graham. How are you both going this week?
Yeah, good, Jez. So after many, many months of very little to no rain, we got about 36 hours of steady rain and our tank went from, I reckon, about 55%. When I left home today, it was up, I think, about 85%. So decent soaking without the poor people who are up in Taree and those places where they're getting extreme. Ours has just been steady. So very, very grateful. A little bit of travel. And today, the reason we're in the car is we're in Junee and we're about to head to West Wyalong.
Very exciting. Very exciting. And Graham, yeah. How are you going, Graham?
Yeah, good, Jez, good. I was sharing with somebody earlier this morning that I've been trying to think of the word, but it won't come. But anyway, I've been playing a Leyland brother for much of this week. And the person that I shared with this morning was of a sufficiently young generation to just give me a blank look.
As someone who is too young to understand what a Leyland brother is, what is a Leyland brother?
So there was Mike and Mal were brothers who literally used to explore Australia in their four-wheel drive, and they turned it into a TV show. So
it was Ask the Leyland Brothers.
They had a catchphrase which was Ask the Leyland Brothers. So if you had a question about what's going on in outback Australia and how do you transform a eastern brown snake into a delicious meal with only a pair of tongs and a shoelace, then you would ask the Leyland Brothers, and off they go. By the way, folks, I'm not recommending that you do that at all.
Fantastic. Well, before we get into today's topic, and we're going to be doing another concept sandbox, which has been actually quite popular on our YouTube channel, so thank you to everybody that's been watching those. I wanted to check in and see how we're feeling about 250 episodes in the books. So I might start with you, Danette, because you and Graham have, I think, been on most of them, and I think you have certainly been doing a few with some of these author chats as well. So how are you feeling about 250 episodes done? It's almost 5 years of doing this podcast, if you can believe it.
How awesome is that, Jez? And I have to go back to when we first started. It literally was me recording myself and my voice on an iPhone, no video. And there was one particularly memorable one where I'm talking away and the crows are in the background. And all you heard was these crows every time I tried to speak. So to look at what you've done, Al, everyone coming on, all of our guests, to get us to this point, that's incredible. So very, very grateful, and it's way better than when I first started. So love what's been done. So thanks, Jez. Thanks, Al. Thanks, John, everyone, Kanika, Leggers, etc., Marg, obviously Graham for helping us, plus all of our guests to get us to this point. It's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's go to Graham. Graham, how are you feeling about 250 episodes, I should say, recorded, locked, and loaded and sent out to everybody?
Yeah, I think I just echo what Danette and the Crows said. It's an amazing result due almost entirely to everybody else's efforts. Certainly not mine, but I'm very grateful for everybody who's contributed along the way. So all of the ML team and Scolin, who's not with us today, unfortunately, but all of the guests, all of the time and effort that you've put into it, Jez, has been amazing.
And Scolin not being with us doesn't mean he's dead. Just means he's not on today's episode. Just wanted to clarify that one.
And Johnny,
thanks to that.
If you're listening to this, John, and you're not sure, maybe just check in with us, please. No, it's great. It's an awesome milestone, Jess. Very great.
And I would actually encourage people, if they want to hear one of our early episodes that I still think is quite memorable, I think it's within the first 10 episodes, you can go back. There's an episode where Jeanette and Graham just go on a walk and do a chat. And I think that's a really good episode. It doesn't end up being what the podcast was at all, but I thought it was a really good early episode. And the other thing that I was going to say is we've been through so many iterations of this podcast. We've done, if you remember, Spotify Green Room when we were doing some live chats with people. We've moved over to Riverside. We've done it on Zoom. We've done it on many platforms, many different lengths, many different guests. But Al, how are you feeling? 250 episodes down. How are you feeling?
Fantastic, Jez. Yeah, can't believe it's been 5 years and that many episodes, and it kind of ties in with, I think what we're talking about today. It's how those little things accumulate over time. Like, I had no idea, and I love the way you do track the data and, notice our progress, because I think that is something that can slip by if we don't notice. So, no, fantastic effort, Jez. Well done for leading the way.
Well, thank you all for being on it. I think it's the teamwork that makes the dream work here at the Magical Learning Podcast. So it's always a pleasure to have everybody on. I was going to say also that speaking of stats, we hit 7,000 followers last week when we released this. I'm gonna hyper edit this so that we have this available for Monday, so that 250 goes to straight away. So this is being recorded unusually soon to the release date, but I wanted to push it just because I thought 250 is a big one. We've got to celebrate it. And so so anyway, congratulations everybody. We've been doing great. And like I was saying, we're about to do a concept sandbox. Our last concept sandbox had a lot of watch hours, so if you want to go check that one out, we're talking about Star Trek and changing the culture on the SS Enterprise. I'd highly recommend people go check that one out because a lot of people liked it. Some people didn't like it. We got one comment that didn't like it, but I think everyone else did, and it's one of our most watched episodes. So if you want to check out what this concept is, go check that out. But as I've been saying, this podcast is always evolving, and one of our latest evolutions is the Concept Sandbox. So what is this? Concept Sandbox basically plays off the idea that business problems are business problems regardless of the context. There's going to be, no matter what your business is, you're likely to run into some problems, and some of those are similar across different businesses. So today we are going to be looking at a business problem, but we like to have a bit of fun with it and set it in a fantastical realm, or some realm that exists not in reality, fictional, I should say. And the reason for that is, A, it makes it more fun, and B, we're not going to get sued by anyone's brand that we accidentally discredit. So that's always very nice. So today, do we have a context? So does anybody want to offer us a fantasy kind of solution or a context for this episode?
Okay, so Peter Pan and Neverland.
Fantastic. So we're going to be looking at a business there. And the business problem is... I didn't actually think of one before the episode. I was too excited by the fact that we're at 250 to think of the proper business problem point. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I've got it. A business, a thing that you used to do for a pretty regular price. There's now a new supplier over in a different country that can do it for a little bit cheaper, and you're starting to notice that some of your clients are starting to move that direction. I think we've done something slightly similar to this before, but let's look at it in the context of Peter Pan. Okay, so Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, they're looking to start a business, and that business, I'm going to say, is selling fairy dust. But it turns out internationally, there's a big fairy dust market, and some people have worked out how to exploit it and make fairy dust for slightly cheaper. Maybe they're cutting it with a different kind of dust or something like that. I don't know. That answer's not exactly true. But that's going to be the business problem. Now, this is the second part of a concept sandbox. We're going to be now having a totally different conversation about the concept of short-term versus long-term. And we're going to use ideas from that to help Peter Pan and the Lost Boys establish their business once again in Neverland. So I might start with Al. Al, did you have any thoughts around the concept of short-term, long-term?
You really got me thinking here, Jez. Interestingly, when I got your email about this idea of short-term versus long-term, I got out of the chair where I was sitting enjoying a little bit of chocolate and got down on the exercise mat and decided that exercise in the short term would be better for me in the long term. And it's been playing on my mind a lot. It's just, what are those simple choices I make? And how will that influence, tomorrow or the long term?
I mean, that's really fascinating, Al, because when I pitched this idea, I was thinking of them as viewing things either as one or the other, but you've actually unified them straight away by saying it's the short term that makes the long term.
It's interesting you say that, Jez, because I watched something on YouTube this morning, and it was somebody giving a speech at a university. And he said, you're all going to expect me to stand up here and tell you to look long-term, plan for your goals. He says, I'm a comedian. He says, I had no long-term goals. He said, I didn't do that. And he said, everything worked out great. And his contrast was long-term goals are great, he said, but if that's all you see, you miss a lot of the opportunities along the way, which kind of ties back into what you're saying. Long and short term, they both go together well. It's not one or the other.
Wow, Al, well, great insight to kick us off with. Danette and Graham, did you have any thoughts on that one?
I love that insight. And I wanted to bring, there's a book I'm reading at the moment called Dose Effect. And the guy in that talks about if we get up early in the morning and we scroll through social media, emails, etc., we get a spike of dopamine, and then all day we will struggle to focus because our brain started off in that spike of dopamine. And so what he suggested is either read a book, do some exercise to get the slow release of dopamine. And that actually helps you focus and get into flow. And so if you can spend 15 minutes working on something really important, could be the exercise that Al was talking about, that slow release of dopamine actually improves our focus and basically gives us a much healthier, shot of that dopamine. So I like that idea of look a little long term. Should I have the chocolate? Should I do the exercise? Maybe it's both of them, but with things that we get instantaneous, short term, some of them, if they give us a spike, may not be healthy for us short term or long term.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, they're both interesting flip sides of the same coin, because it's like, I think what Al was saying was almost the positive version, and what you're saying is kind of the negative version. Like even that short-term small steps that are in the negative direction can build up to long-term much bigger negative things. And what Al's saying is the opposite. If you start short-term good things, then that can create a domino effect of positive things going forward. So it can kind of go either way. But I think now we can have fun with this. Let's throw this back to the concept sandbox quickly, just for a bit of a Peter Pan. How can Peter Pan use this idea perhaps of thinking long-term but acting short-term to perhaps help the business?
I'm thinking Peter Pan doesn't have a phone to start with. It's all singing and dancing, which is very positive.
And so thinking short-term, long-term, we know that good businesses, which is what Peter Pan wants to set up, they're built on good relationships. So, sometimes the short-term dollars you save by buying a cheaper product, for argument's sake, longer term aren't great for your relationships with your customers, etc. So maybe part of what Peter Pan and the Lost Boys need to do is go and talk to different suppliers around the fairy dust and find out what drives them to create the product, why it's cheap. Is it always going to be cheap? Does it mean good quality for their clients, etc.? So maybe they're starting to have conversations about both the why of the suppliers and is it more a short-term focus or a more long-term focus? Could be both. But really starting to get to know them to think, okay, longer term, what relationships are going to help us if we're selling the fairy dust to our customers? What might we need to build in our relationships with our suppliers, both short and long term?
Yeah, very interesting. And I think also just playing off that, if they're feeling like the reason that this new fairy dust is cheaper is because it's worse quality, then they don't even have to necessarily nudge their price at all, because they are just saying we have a more pure or premium product perhaps. And if you want the cheaper version, it's just going to be worse quality. And we're happy to just kind of stay where we are. So that could be kind of an interesting short-term, long-term thing, with the idea being that in the same way that a lot of these websites like Temu or Shein, which are these sort of extremely cheap knockoffs of regular products, be that typically fashion, but it's you can buy a pair of pants for $5. The idea is that it's almost a quantity thing. Like people can use these things really easily, and it is a little bit about accessibility. If you can't afford a $90 pair of jeans, maybe this is the option. But it also, both of those businesses are kind of past the point where they can still sell properly to people, because people understand that when I'm paying $5 for a pair of pants, they probably aren't going to look very good. They're probably not going to fit, and they're probably not going to last at all. So what happens is the initial wave of people getting all these products from these things, and you could spend $100 and get 15 or 16 products back, so people could get this huge haul for such a small amount of money. But now everybody understands what the quality of that material is, and also to some degree what the conditions are that the people that have to make them are in. That makes people, even though it's still the cheapest options on the market, it's not it's not as popular anymore, and it's almost buying them is almost an interesting statement saying that I still support this type of business despite the damage that I know it does. So these could all be things, if we're thinking long term for the Peter Pan business, it's just stay where you are and allow the other business to unravel should it be doing things unethically.
And I love that, Jez, because we're encouraging Peter Pan and the Lost Boys to think, sustainably. And this is why I love dealing with, say, family businesses, because they often look generationally. So when they're making those big decisions, it's what's the impact, not just this year, but say in 20, 30 years. If you think about those long-term sustainable businesses, they're not necessarily making those short-term, let's go cheap, let's go, not ethically sourced. Let's be okay with being a little bit more expensive, but we know that that's actually better quality, but also that their people are being treated correctly and stuff like that. So, it's more of a win-win rather than someone wins but someone loses as well.
Yeah, and I think also we should also bring up that Tinkerbell is a crucial element in this whole deal. Tinkerbell, I forgot to mention her at the beginning, but she's probably the most important point of this whole business operation. So Tinkerbell, it's also about what's good for her, because she's the one that has to end up making it at the end of the day.
Totally. And Captain Hook, we forgot about Captain Hook too. He could be the computer.
It certainly could be the trying to hook the other customers away.
What's coming up for me there with Captain Hook is it's long-term or short-term thinking, as in Captain Hook will have ideas from the past. It's always been that way. Where I see someone like Tinkerbell, like Danette says, will go out and actually find out, what are the suppliers or what are our customers talking about versus, I know what they're talking about. It's all about the bottom price, which is often not the case.
That's a great insight, Al. Absolutely love it. I might throw to Graham. Graham, did you have any thoughts on long-term versus short-term or Peter Pan's dilemma?
No. But thank you for asking.
No worries.
I was thinking so many things. None of them were appropriate. Is Tinkerbell's role is she the chief chemist in producing this magic pixie dust?
Potentially.
And then I don't really want to get into the whole dose effect in using said pixie dust. But I was sort of curious about the intention behind Pan Enterprises or Pan Global, probably Pan Universal.
Whatever.
Sure. Could they seek to collaborate with their customers and change their customers' focus from short-term to long-term? Because a lot of retail, the Temus, even Amazon do it. They're all about the short term. They just want you to buy something now because you'll feel better having bought it now. They don't care about what you want to do in 6 months' time as long as you go back to buy something else from them and get that short term hit. Could you, Tinkerbell, influence Peter and the Lost Boys to change the way they see the relationship between themselves as the producers of the magic pixie dust, etc.? To also get their customers to start thinking longer term and how between them as a collaborative sort of group, the customers could influence what Pan Enterprises produces in a way that Pan Enterprises is also looking longer term rather than shorter term. So instead of being too focused on just getting the next sale because we need the cash, how can we create something that's actually going to benefit not just our customers, but others longer term? And how do we get our customers to stop thinking, if they are short term, like I just need a fix now, as in I need retail therapy right now, and start thinking longer term? And most of that probably doesn't make sense. And that's probably because for those of you listening and or watching, your pixie dust dose may not be quite correct.
No, Graham, I actually love that. I love that thought around don't just look at the competitor and that's the only marker, and it's actually about the education of your consumers, because that's really what has undone Shein and Temu, is just the education of the consumers and going, okay, even though this is cheap, I don't like what is happening as a result of these products. So that's making people go to alternative brands. So I actually think that's a great solution. Great. Well, I might actually just jump off that because my short-term, long-term observation was around this same similar idea, which is that how much it feels like businesses are leaning into short-term payments for shareholders to long-term damage to their brand. The most obvious one that comes up recently is, of course, Elon Musk, who thought he could do everything and he's damaged all of his brands because he's now attached to them, and it's their shareholders are bringing him in to ask him to stop doing all these things and what have you. And it shows that when you try and do short-term things like that, maybe outside of that scope, how much damage that can do long-term. We've seen the sales of Teslas completely drop in Europe, and I don't think they're ever coming back. So that's the long-term effect of negative short-term things. But we see it a lot. I'll use an example of I don't know, I won't name them, but it's a telecommunication company, and it's not the bottom rung one. So let me just put it that way in Australia. It's one of our sort of more premier telecommunication companies, and I was having a lot of problems with them, dropping in and out of my internet. And I think people will remember, our recording people will remember, I would drop in and out, and I had to change out of them. And the way to drop out of their internet, you had to do it via a chat bot. Okay, which is fascinating, which tells us already that they've made a short-term decision to get rid of customer service in service of AI, which is cheaper but obviously less effective. I asked, okay, can I cancel my service? It said, waiting for the next available operator. I left it for 12 hours, nothing. So then I asked again, 12 hours, nothing. So then I said, okay, I'm just going to screenshot this conversation and contact the ACCC. Fascinatingly, someone appeared straight away, which was very interesting. And they said, and then they were trying to charge me, and I said, hey, I'm just going to show those screenshots. And they said, let's just call it even, Stevens, and you can cancel your plan and it's all good. So I just wanted to say that had, to me, it's a brand that I think also in Australia used to be quite popular. And I think that certainly from word of mouth, it's one that has totally had its brand deteriorated by making short-term shareholder decisions that have affected what was a long-term brand that people trusted into one that I think people totally distrust. And it's basically, if you keep making these short-term decisions, all you're asking is that your business is going to collapse soon because people will just leave to more consistent places. So I think tying all of this back to Peter Pan is we can sort of look and think like, should all of them, Tinkerbell, Peter Pan, and the Lost Boys, really be thinking about the long term and think, is Hook just so short-term focused that we'll actually be able to nab customers when we're more consistent and his material is not as good?
Jez, and I love your story because it speaks to something that not everyone thinks about when they're running business until it becomes a problem. But when we make decisions, when we don't consult, when we don't collaborate, we often have blind spots. So the thing is, our brain goes, oh, that's a great decision. Now, most of that, when our brain does that, is it's running biases, which is our brain's shortcut to decision making. The problem is that means that they're not good decisions. And in business, when you fail to make good decisions, so for Peter Pan, thinking short term, following along with, say, Captain Hook, is that the worst thing that can happen is you then end up with reputation damage, because for every CEO of any organisation, reputation damage is number one risk. And so you encountered a number one risk where, that organisation, had they picked up and said, great, Jez, talking to a human, yes, of course, let's find out why you want to cancel, can we fix that, versus let's put you with the chat box for 12 hours and then another 12 hours and another 12 hours, and then you have to threaten them by, I'll just take a screenshot of this and go to the ACCC, versus a human going, you know what, I'm really sorry that you experienced that. Here's a bit of magic fairy dust, because we supplied from Pan Universal.
Pan Galactic.
Pan Galactic.
Pan Galactic Gargle Blaster, which Peter does not actually manufacture but may consume occasionally.
So by making some short-term decisions, you actually impact not just, maybe you get a spike in your revenue for a little while, but that reputation damage that takes, because once we lose trust in a brand, that costs an enormous amount to get back. So I reckon that, one of the things that Peter Pan, the Lost Boys, Tinkerbell, etc., should really concentrate is, it's not so much about the money. If we look longer term, how do we ensure that we have a trusted brand that our customers, our suppliers trust? And yes, you can do that low cost, but you need to be very explicit, and you still need to make ethical decisions, because the moment you don't make ethical decisions, once that hits the Neverland News, it won't be just one customer that we have a problem with. So I think there's a really important thing that long-term, that reputation, we can damage it short-term. It takes a long-term to fix it too. And you may never get back.
And and you've kind of actually hit on something there, Danette, which is that sometimes your brand can be about what you don't do. Like when I think about probably the most interesting film studios at the moment, for example, A24 is in that list because it doesn't make franchise movies. It just makes kind of one-off weird movies. And so its brand is that we just make strange one-off movies. And that's what separates us from the other ones that franchise-leaning studios typically. And so that creates that brand, which creates a sort of, as you were saying, a trust. Like where I can trust that this movie is going to be a bit weird and, and it's going to be different than what I'm seeing from the other studios. So I love that insight today.
And Jez, that's just raised in me that one of the things that breaches trust is inconsistency. So if we have a consistent message to the market and we follow that, there's no surprises to the brain. And so the brain goes, okay, I trust that brand. Even if I don't like what they do or their message, I at least trust them to do it their way that they've promoted to the market. But if, say, Pan Universal decides that it's advertising that it does quality fairy dust, and then they make that short-term decision and maybe they have to do a product recall, then people don't trust that brand anymore because they've made that short-term decision. So they need to be on brand and in alignment in their decision-making. So love that.
The other one coming up for me, Jez, somebody said to me a little while ago, do you know why speeding is the most common, I'm not sure, most common thing on our roads for causes of accidents? It was simply because it is the easiest box to tick, which kind of, I was just thinking as Danette was talking then, sometimes we will just go the easiest path. Right now it is easy to tick speeding in that example and away we go, versus to tick other boxes has got to be a whole investigation. And I think that happens, that's what someone was sort of pointing out to me now that I'm becoming an assessor. Do I want to just tick the box and send the student on the way, or am I going to put the effort into giving that student learning that'll set them up long term? And often the student just wants the tick and on their way.
Short term versus long term again.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I think that we've covered quite a lot of great ground here, and I think we've given a lot of really good info to Peter Pan and Tinkerbell and the Lost Boys to sort of help them out here. But I thought maybe we'll grab some final thoughts here on not just short-term versus long-term, but also what I'm going to call the Peter Pan predicament. So I might start with Al. Al, did you have any thoughts?
To me, the Peter Pan predicament, I'm seeing everybody working as a team, getting Tinkerbell and Captain Hook's advice, seeing the whole spectrum of ideas versus just shutting down, seeing that one thing, and especially talking to our customers and hearing their point of view as well.
Well, absolutely love that, Al. And thanks for being on episode 250. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on.
Thanks, Jez. My pleasure.
Danette, did you have any final thoughts on the Peter Pan predicament or short-term versus long-term?
I loved Al's distinction right there at the end around easy versus hard. And I think there is a way to make the long-term easy by making habits around and again, being consistent. So a habit in a business might be that we always buy the best quality. We don't want Peter Pan to have those problems. So I think that it's also making it part of our culture, making it part of the decisions that if we focus long-term, set up those beautiful habits, we can make the long-term easy as well. And I think all of it, compounding interest, if we do little, eventually it takes off awesome. So I'd say keep that beautiful quality fairy dust so that we get that beautiful return eventually in terms of profits, etc.
Fantastic, Danette. And Danette, thanks again for 250 episodes. You've done a lot of them, so thank you so much. And Graham, any final thoughts on short-term versus long-term or Peter Pan's predicament?
So many. I'll go back to one of the things that Al shared early on about you need to have both long-term, short-term view. I was talking earlier about ethical decision-making in business, and that sort of sitting behind that is intention. Yeah. And this idea of purpose. What are we actually trying to achieve? So for part of Peter's predicament is possibly there's not enough P words. I need more alliteration. Help me out. Peter Pan's possible predicament. Again, a lot of it just comes back to that. Why do we exist as a business? What are we trying to achieve as an organisation? Me, Tinker, Hook, the boys. Because again, short term, if we're just chasing popularity or likes or downloads or cash, we could just diversify. We could start cutting out dust with some other dodgy stuff that isn't going to be good for anybody. But hey, if it means we sell more, we get more cash flow, let's just do that. And then I can stick another useless electric car on another planet. Yeah. Moving on from that, it's like pan-galactic littering. Sure how that works. What did I get this straight? You can just delete half of that just because I do like the idea of, can I... So if I'm thinking about short-term and long-term, short-term is get down on the mat, the short-term pain, get down on the mat, do the exercise. The long-term gain is I'm healthier as a result. Can I blend that? Can I eat my chocolate and do the exercise at the same time? Yes, you can. Just don't have chocolate with bits in it, just in case, folks. Just really nice, high-quality dark chocolate. Go for it. Can you have an entire block of dark chocolate while you go for a run around the block? If the block is the size of, I don't know, Manhattan, then yes, you can do that. Yeah, I think that's perfectly okay. I'm not a doctor, by the way. If you do that and you have a heart attack, don't call me. Just a quick thank you again to everybody, the team, to Jez, Danette, Al, John, Kadeka, Leggers, Mark, everybody who's been involved, all of the people who've been on as guest speakers. I'm not sure whether to call them overachievers or masochists who've been on more than once. But again, thanks everybody. What a ride so far.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Graham, and thanks for being on the 250, the big 250 episode, and for being on all the episodes. We want to thank some of our guests that have returned many times, our Colin Ellis's, our Bernie Kelly's, friends of the show, but we have many friends of the show, and we love to keep building them, so we will certainly have on many more guests in the future, but we will be, of course, having Bernie on shortly, which is exciting, so returning guest, returning just after 250. To everybody that's been listening and sharing for the 250 and building up our 7,000 subscribers on YouTube, we want to say thank you all so much to everybody that's been enjoying these Concept Sandbox. If you like this episode, we recommend you go back over to our Star Trek episode. Like I said, it's one of our more watched episodes, so that's really exciting. Or if you want to check out interviews with sort of thought leaders and people with really unique insights or books, check out some of the other episodes. But to everybody that's been listening, to all the team here, I want to say thank you and have a magical week.